Tonight's story returns to the world before walls, to nights when Native Americans rested under open sky, surrounded by the hum of insects and the slow breath of wind through grass. This is How Native Americans Slept Outdoors. Surrounded by insects, a calm journey into the practical ways people found sleep within the rhythm of the land. You might be listening in New York, where lights soften along the Hudson, or in Denver, where the mountains fade into dusk. Perhaps you're still awake in Los Angeles, with ocean air moving through quiet streets, or beginning your morning in Toronto, where pale light reaches across Lake Ontario. Wherever you are, picture ground cleared of stones, a small fire set for smoke, and bedding of grasses or hides shaped to the body. Crickets call, embers settle, and the air cools by degrees. Families sleep close for warmth and safety while the sky turns slowly overhead. If this moment brings you ease, leave a short comment telling where you're listening from, and subscribe so the next story arrives when night does, returning you to this steady voice and the old calm it keeps. Your notes and support help keep these quiet histories alive. Before tents and timber homes, sleep was shaped by the land itself. Across the vast plains, the soil stayed warm long after sunset, and people chose gentle slops where rain would not gather. In the woodlands, moss and pine needles softened the ground, holding a faint scent that clung to hair and hides. Along the rivers, reeds bent in the night breeze, their steady movement warning of animals or changing wind. The people who lived here understood these quiet details, how to face the body toward warmth, how to listen for the steady rhythm of insects before rest. Each night was prepared, never careless. Stones were cleared, a ring of ashes scattered, and bedding laid with care. Around them, the air thickened with the hum of the life. Mosquitoes, moths, and the small clicking sounds of beetles in leaf piles. These were not distractions, but familiar companions. The land never truly slept, and neither did the people completely. They drifted between awareness and dream, half listening to the world that sheltered them. From those open camps a deep knowledge grew, of soil, scent, and sound, that shaped how generations after would build and rest. Farther west, in dry valleys and high plateaus, the nights cooled quickly after sunset. Families travelling through these wide spaces learned to keep the warmth they built during the day. They gathered sagebrush, dry grass, and soft bark to form bedding that lifted them slightly from the ground. The smell of crushed sage carried through the still air, and the smoke of small fires rose in thin columns, carrying with it the buzzing insects that feared its touch. Sleeping in the open required attention. The direction of wind, the path of stars, the sound of distant water. Each clue marked safety or danger. Adults rested lightly, waking often to feed embers or check the edges of the camp. Children slept closest to the warmth, wrapped in hides that trapped the faint heat of breath. Above them, the night sky was so wide that its movement could be felt as time itself passing overhead. In this quiet balance between exposure and protection, sleep was never only rest. It was participation in the land's rhythm, a nightly exchange between human warmth and the cool patience of the earth that carried them. In the northern forests, nights carried the scent of resin and damp bark. Families there built low shelters from branches, not to shut out the night, but to shape it. Openings were left to let smoke drift and to guide insects away. Beds of spruce needles and dried grass rested over the earth, creating soft insulation against the cold ground. When the air thickened with mosquitoes, smoke from smouldering wood and crushed herbs filled the camp. The gentle haze settled over sleeping forms, enough to quiet the biting wings. Near water, cattail fluff and animal hides added warmth and kept moisture from seeping through. The constant drone of insects became part of the background, a sound that marked the season as clearly as birdsong at dawn. Sleep came slowly but deeply, in the steady company of these natural rhythms. The people learned that comfort did not mean silence. It meant familiarity. Every rustle or hum belonged to the same living world they depended on. When the first faint light touched the tree line, they stirred quietly, their bodies marked with the scent of smoke, pine, and earth. Signs of another night passed safely beneath the breathing canopy of the forest. In desert lands, nights turned cold, and people spread thin blankets over sand that still held daytime heat. Some slept beneath woven mats. Others lay beneath stars so bright they seemed to flicker against eyelids. The idea of sleep was never separate from living. It was another act of awareness. People listened for changes in the wind, the pause in frog calls, or the approach of hooves far away. Insects too responded to these signals, vanishing when storms neared or when cold descended before dawn. By sunrise, families rose together, shaking off dew and brushing soil from their hides. Embers were gathered, tools packed, and paths chosen before the sun cleared the horizon. Night after night, generation after generation, these quiet practices taught balance, how to rest within a world alive with movement. It was this steady harmony between body, earth, and every small creature that allowed them to sleep unafraid beneath a sky that never closed. As daylight faded, the people prepared each resting place with care. The ground was never left as it was found. First, they looked for a place where grass grew thick but not high, a space that would stay dry even after rain. Men cleared stones and branches with wooden tools, while women gathered handfuls of soft grass and bark to line the ground. In colder regions, layers of dried moss held warmth and kept moisture from the skin. Around each camp, a low ring of ashes marked the safe circle where fire had burned earlier, keeping insects and small animals away. The site was chosen for its silence, its protection from wind, and its nearness to water that could still be reached without danger. These steps became habit, repeated with the rhythm of each journey. When they rested in groups, sleeping spots formed loose circles, always with openings toward the fire's smoke. In those final moments before dusk, tools were stacked neatly beside bedding, and the night became a shared space of order and calm. A place built not with walls, but with memory and understanding of the ground beneath them. In warmer months, sleeping under open skies became an act of balance between comfort and caution. The heat of day faded slowly, but insects stirred with the evening air. To rest without interruption, people learned to read the wind and the lay of the land. Camps were placed on small rises where breezes moved freely and drove mosquitoes away. Bedding was simple, woven grass mats or hides stretched smooth over earth. Fires were lit nearby, not for warmth, but for smoke, using green wood or damp grass to create a steady haze. This smoke, rising low, carried through the camp like a silent guardian. In the eastern woodlands, crushed cedar or sweetgrass was sometimes added to the embers for its scent and its power to repel biting flies. Sleepers positioned themselves so smoke drifted gently past their faces without choking them. Children were laid closest to the centre, protected by the slow, smoky air and the soft sound of crackling wood. Through practice and patience, these people made rest possible, in a world alive with movement. Each small adjustment, each breeze read correctly, a quiet example of how knowledge made even an open night a place of safety. In colder seasons, sleep demanded more preparation than any other time. The open ground hardened quickly after sunset, and frost crept upward through the soil into the bones. To stay warm, people raised their bedding slightly with branches or woven mats of reeds. Hides were spread fur side down to trap the body's heat, and spare garments were folded beneath heads as small pillows. Fires burned close by, their embers kept alive through the night with careful tending. When storms threatened, makeshift windbreaks of poles and bark were lifted to one side, allowing smoke to drift while blocking harsh wind. Even in the most exposed regions, each camp became a quiet design of survival. Every log, stone and hide placed with purpose. Families shared tasks without speaking, guided by rhythm more than command. When the last daylight faded, the ring of sleepers formed around the fire, its glow reflected in eyes half closed with fatigue. Above them, clouds carried pale flickers of light, and insects clung to warmth near the coals. Within this fragile space, they rested not against nature, but within it, trusting experience more than walls, their calm shaped entirely by the land they knew. Every region demanded its own small inventions for rest. Along the southern plains, sleepers brushed their skin with a mix of animal fat and crushed herbs to discourage biting flies. In the damp forests, bedding was raised on frames of thin logs to escape crawling insects and heavy dew. On coastal shores, driftwood and seagrass formed soft pads that stayed dry when tides breathed through the night. These details changed from place to place, yet the purpose stayed the same, to rest safely under open air. Firelight marked the living heart of every camp. Around it, each object, sleeping body, drying hide, tool or basket, had an order passed down through memory. When winds shifted, they rebuilt the fire rings, moved their bedding, or redirected the smoke to flow cleanly through camp. Children learned these routines by watching, not instruction. Knowledge of sleep was taught through repetition, as natural as walking or shaping stone. This quiet precision gave rest its meaning. To lie safely in a world alive with insects and sound required preparation as careful as any hunt, every movement guided by the long rhythm of generations that had done the same before. When the last tasks ended, the camp settled into silence. The air cooled and insects softened their chorus, their wings tracing faint lines through smoke. Families lay close to the ground, hides pulled over shoulders, the scent of earth and fire mingling in each breath. The land around them remained alive. Frogs pulsed from dark ponds, and unseen wings rustled across tall grass. Sleep came slowly but completely, drawn by exhaustion and trust. There were no walls to block the world, no roof to dull the stars. Yet this openness gave safety through knowledge and familiarity. They knew which winds carried rain, which insects vanished before cold, and how fire's scent lingered long enough to warn away animals. The night was not feared but studied, its signs read like words on stone. From a distance, a sleeping camp seemed part of the landscape, smoke blending with mist, figures barely outlined in the glow of coals. Here, every sound and flicker belonged. To rest in such a place was not escape from the world, but reunion with it, a rhythm older than memory, where even sleep served as another form of listening. When darkness deepened, fire became the heart of every camp. Its glow shaped the night as clearly as the sun defined the day. The people understood its power. Warmth, light, and safety woven together in a single living element. Fires were never left large. They were tended to breathe slowly, producing steady heat and the soft curl of smoke that insects avoided. Around each flame, families arranged themselves in a loose half-circle, bodies facing inward, feet toward the warmth. The fire's smoke drifted across them, forming a thin barrier against mosquitoes and flies. Tools and bundles rested just beyond the ring of the light, where eyes could still see their outlines. Sleepers trusted this boundary more than any wall. The faint sound of crackling wood replaced the noises of day, marking the passage into rest. Even while sleeping, some stirred to feed new branches into the coals, keeping the night alive with a rhythm older than language. In every camp across forests, plains, and valleys, that rhythm tied families together. The glow of one fire became part of another far away, small islands of warmth scattered across a continent of darkness. The choice of wood determined how long the fire lived and how safely it burned. Dry willow, oak, or cedar were favoured for steady coals. Green wood or damp grass was added when smoke was needed to drive away biting insects. Each piece was placed carefully, not thrown, because sparks could catch on hides or grass. Children learned early which woods hissed, which burned quietly, and which sent smoke too thick to breathe. Firekeeping was a quiet task shared among adults who slept in turns. Some rested while others watched, shifting logs and feeding the flames through slow hours. The watchers listened for the wind, for movement in the brush, for the rhythm of night insects fading and returning. When the smoke grew thin, handfuls of herbs or damp moss were thrown on to renew the scent that repelled flies. These simple materials, wood, grass, and ash, were the only tools needed to make the night livable. The firelight marked not only protection from insects, but the pulse of human presence in a wild and moving world. To sleep near it was to sleep within something known, something that remembered them as much as they remembered it. Around the campfire, rest and vigilance shared the same space. Those awake watched the patterns of flame reflected in the eyes of others already sleeping. Firelight softened the shapes of faces, revealing the slow rhythm of breathing, the rise and fall of hides as warmth gathered underneath. The quiet crackle of burning wood filled the air, blending with insect hums that kept their distance. The watchers sat still, sometimes using a stick to turn the coals or stir the ashes, keeping sparks low but steady. The air closest to the fire was warm, but beyond a few steps the cold returned, marked by the sudden chorus of unseen insects. In that narrow zone of heat and shadow, the camp existed as a living border between comfort and wilderness. The people never let the flame die completely, even before dawn. When embers cooled, they were covered with fresh bark to preserve their glow. From these embers, new fires were born each morning, proof that the night had passed safely. Within its circle of light and smoke, families found the same security that later generations would seek behind doors, the quiet certainty that life continued when darkness fell. For many families, firelight also shaped the quiet hours before sleep. After the evening meal, stories were sometimes spoken in low voices, shared not as performance, but as memory. The flames cast moving patterns against the hides and grass, turning the camp into a living room of shifting light. The youngest listened with half-closed eyes, their bodies stretched near the warmth, while elders spoke of migrations, animals, and seasons. Insects moved beyond the smoke's reach, their faint buzzing forming a steady rhythm behind the words. When speech ended, silence filled the space without discomfort. The crackling wood, the soft sound of breathing, and the distant cry of a night bird replaced conversation. Those still awake kept the coals alive, turning logs as if by instinct. It was through these shared routines that children learned not just survival, but patience, the way time slowed when measured by the life of a flame. To them, the night was not something to fear, it was something to understand. When at last they lay down, the final light from the fire lingered behind closed eyelids, connecting the stillness of sleep with the steady heart of the burning coals beside them. By dawn, only faint ribbons of smoke marked where the fires had burned through the night. The ashes were spread carefully, scattered so no ember remained to catch in the grass. A few glowing coals were saved in clay bowls or bark containers, carried to the next camp to begin the next fire. Nothing was wasted, not wood, not effort, not warmth. As the sky lightened, insects returned to the air, their hum joining the awakening sounds of birds and wind. People rose slowly, brushing off hides and stretching near the fading warmth. Sleep had been shallow but renewing, shaped by the pulse of flame and the quiet trust it gave. In this pattern, night after night, generation after generation, fire was not a tool but a companion. Its smoke taught them where to sleep, its warmth taught them when to rise. Even when travelling, the memory of its glow stayed with them, a thread connecting every camp to the one before. The night might have been filled with movement, but the fire held its place, steady, breathing, alive, marking the boundary between danger and rest that defined the rhythm of life itself. When the last flames faded to red embers, the rhythm of the night took over. Sleep came in quiet stages, not as one long dream but as intervals shaped by the movement of air, sound, and warmth. Many families rested in cycles, dozing for a few hours, waking briefly to tend the fire or shift position, then falling back into softer rest. This broken sleep matched the natural world around them. Crickets quieted near midnight, only to begin again when dew formed. The calls of night birds rose and fell in patterns that signalled the hours without any need for measure. People did not fight these pauses, they accepted them as part of living outdoors. Some used the short waking moments to add wood, stretch, or listen for animals moving in the distance. In these hours, the line between sleep and waking blurred. The body stayed half aware, guided by instinct more than thought. This way of resting, balanced between alertness and calm, kept them safe and restored, proving that sleep was not an escape from the world but a steady rhythm within it, an ancient conversation between breath, flame, and the living earth beneath. The night's rhythm depended on sound as much as sight. In the open, silence was never complete. Even in still air there was the hum of insects, the far splash of water, and the muffled step of an animal passing through grass. These sounds formed the background of every dream, and people learned to recognize their meaning without fear. The low buzz of mosquitoes near the fire's edge signaled that the smoke still worked. The croak of frogs meant the river remained calm and unchanged. When an unfamiliar sound broke the pattern, eyes opened instantly, then closed again once safety returned. Children grew up surrounded by these quiet lessons, their sense of awareness shaped by the sounds of the night. Sleep did not separate them from the world, it trained them to belong within it. With each passing hour, the camp breathed in harmony with the living landscape. The rustle of wings replaced the voices of people, and before dawn, only the faint hiss of cooling embers remained. The night taught its listeners the difference between alarm and peace, between disturbance and rhythm, a knowledge carried long after the fires were gone. Temperature also set the rhythm of rest. In summer, warmth lingered deep into the night, and people often uncovered their shoulders, letting the air pass freely over their skin. In colder seasons, the opposite held true. Hides were wrapped tighter, bodies drawn closer together, every movement meant to hold what little heat the fire released. The changing air guided sleep in ways no clock could measure. Those who slept lightly woke with each shift in wind or drop in temperature. Without needing to speak, they reached for more covering or adjusted their place beside the coals. Children learned early to tell the time by air alone. The cool edge before dawn meant morning approached. This awareness gave rest its depth. It was not about length, but balance. Each breath, each rustle of hide followed the pattern of the night itself. When sleep finally deepened, it carried the scent of wood smoke, grass and ash, blending body and environment into one calm exchange. In the world of open camps, to sleep was to move with the elements, guided by air, sound and firelight. The quiet pulse that had shaped human rest for thousands of years. Sharing sleep built a sense of quiet connection. Families often rested close together, forming a single shape against the earth. Elders lay nearest the fire where warmth stayed constant. Children and mothers rested between them, shielded from cold air and drifting smoke. These positions repeated night after night, creating comfort through familiarity. No one needed to speak before sleeping. Each person knew their place by habit. When a child stirred, a hand reached gently from the dark to settle them again. The fire's soft light showed only outlines, curved backs, folded arms, and the slow rise of breath. To those outside the circle, it appeared as one body sleeping. In this closeness, there was safety from both cold and fear. Rest was shared, not private. Even dreams seemed to flow through the group like passing air. When morning light touched their faces, the same stillness remained for a moment longer, as if sleep itself refused to end. This nightly arrangement, repeated for generations, formed one of the oldest unspoken traditions, an understanding that survival was not only through strength or skill, but through the warmth of bodies trusting each other under a single sky. As dawn approached, the rhythm of sleep shifted again. The coldest hour came just before sunrise, when fires burned lowest and the world turned silent. Some woke early to stir the ashes, feeding small sticks into glowing coals until light returned to their faces. Others remained half asleep, waiting for the first birds to begin their morning calls. The insects too stirred, their hum faintly returning as darkness faded. The earth warmed slowly beneath them, carrying the promise of another day's work. These final moments of rest were neither waking nor dreaming, but something in between, a still balance between night and day. The people rose without haste, stretching beside the fire, brushing away dew from hides, and breathing in the cool air that followed sunrise. In that brief pause they felt the weight of the night lift away. Every sense, sound, smell, and touch, was clear again. The rhythm that had guided their rest now turned outward, into the rhythm of life returning. To them, the night was never wasted time. It was the other half of living, a quiet teacher that reminded them how to move, breathe, and begin again. When the air warmed after sunrise, insects returned in full. Their hum became part of daily life, a sound that marked the living balance between land and people. Mosquitoes gathered near water, beetles crept through grass, and clouds of small flies shimmered above marshes. For those who lived close to the ground, these creatures were constant neighbours. The people understood their behaviour, learning when and where they gathered, when to avoid their breeding places, and when wind or cold would drive them away. In the warm months, insects arrived with such regularity that their patterns guided travel. Camps were chosen not only for water and shelter, but for how insects moved through the area. Knowledge of wind direction and vegetation helped them rest undisturbed. Near rivers, fires burned day and night, their smoke thin but steady. On high ground, breezes carried relief, keeping the buzzing clouds at distance. The people did not curse these small lives. They adapted to them. To live outdoors meant sharing the same world, not fighting against it. Insects, like rain and heat, were simply part of the season's rhythm, a quiet reminder that every movement on the land had its own purpose. The simplest protection came from smoke and scent. Fire was both companion and barrier, and the people learned how different woods carried different powers. Dried sage, cedar, and sweetgrass produced smoke that insects avoided, and these plants were gathered each summer for that purpose. Small bundles were tied together, dried in the sun, and burned near sleeping places. The scent clung to hair and hides, offering hours of safety. In wetter regions, crushed leaves of wild mint or pine needles were rubbed directly on skin, leaving a cool layer that discouraged bites. Animal fat mixed with ash worked the same way, sealing the surface from stings. None of these methods required tools, only observation and patience. Over generations, families passed down which plants burned cleanly and which created thick smoke, which herbs lasted longest when stored through winter. The knowledge spread from one camp to another, forming a quiet network of shared understanding. These were not inventions born of fear, but of harmony. The people did not seek to control the land. They sought to live alongside its smallest inhabitants, finding balance in something as simple as the drift of smoke through morning air. By night, the hum of insects shaped the soundscape as clearly as wind or water. Their constant presence defined summer nights across the plains, woodlands, and river valleys. Families resting near fires could hear the difference between mosquito whine and cricket pulse, between the flutter of moths and the low clicking of beetles in dry grass. These sounds were not interruptions, but signals. They marked temperature changes, moisture levels, and the coming of storms. When insects fell silent, people knew that heavy rain or sudden cold approached. Elders taught children to listen carefully, explaining that silence from insects was a warning, just as smoke flattening over a fire meant a shift in weather. In this way, even the smallest life served as teacher. The insect's rhythm joined the rhythm of human rest, forming one continuous pattern that guided movement and sleep. Those who lived closest to nature did not separate themselves from it. They found comfort in its predictability. To them, the night's hum was a kind of reassurance, a steady voice reminding them that the world around them was alive, balanced, and moving as it always had. Some insects were more than background. They were woven into daily observation. Ants showed changes in weather by the way they carried food. Bees, though wild and often distant, marked flowering seasons and guided travellers toward meadows rich in pollen. In some regions, the soft glow of fireflies at dusk signalled both direction and safety, proof that the air was still and the night calm. People spoke of these creatures not as nuisances, but as part of the same living order that governed plants and rivers. Their patterns helped hunters and gatherers alike. When swarms thickened, fish often moved closer to the surface, feeding on what fell from the air. Children learned to watch for these signs while adults prepared traps or nets. Through such careful observation, even the smallest wing or hum became a source of knowledge. They listened more than they acted, adjusting habits with respect instead of struggle. The insects were never tamed, yet their presence taught attention, rhythm, and patience. In the quiet language of movement and sound, the land revealed itself, and those who lived within it understood that every buzzing wing carried meaning beyond its size or sting. Over time, this coexistence shaped a kind of trust. The people did not expect comfort every night. They accepted that life outdoors meant sharing space with creatures both seen and unseen. Smoke, scent, and knowledge made the nights bearable, but understanding made them peaceful. Insects fed the birds that marked morning and helped pollinate the plants that provided food and medicine. To harm them without need would have broken the balance that kept everything alive. When newcomers later described these nights as harsh or wild, they missed what truly existed there, a steady exchange between human and earth. For those who slept on the ground, the hum of insects was not a sound to endure but to recognize, as one might recognize a friend's breathing nearby. The night was full, not empty. Even the smallest wings reminded them of connection, of how life surrounded and sustained their own. As fires cooled and dawn returned, that sound faded back into daylight, carried by the wind. What remained was memory, proof that peace could exist not in silence, but in the shared movement of all living things. As the seasons turned and the air thickened with insects, families began to shape the spaces around their sleeping grounds more carefully. The open camps that had served through spring slowly gave way to simple shelters, structures built from what the land freely offered. Branches were leaned together to form low frames, their gaps filled with grass, bark, or hides, to break the wind and deflect insects. These were not homes in the modern sense. They were brief, flexible forms meant to rise and fall with the rhythm of travel. Each region developed its own variations. In the woodlands, bent saplings created dome-like coverings, while on the plains, taller poles supported hides that could be rolled aside during heat. These shelters filtered light, softened air, and gathered the faint scent of smoke that kept biting flies away. They marked the boundary between open and enclosed life, between the body and the world. Even so, they remained part of the landscape, structures that breathed, moved, and aged with it. Each night's rest beneath their protection reminded the people that comfort came not from walls, but from knowing how to shape the earth itself into safety. In wetter regions, the challenge was not only insects but moisture. Along the river valleys and forest edges, the ground held dampness even through warm months. To stay dry, people lifted their bedding above the earth. Simple platforms were built from crossed poles tied with rawhide or fibre cord, covered with layers of reeds and hides. Above these, light roofs of bark or woven mats were fixed to poles, angled just enough for rain to slide away. Smoke from small fires drifted through the openings, carrying the scent of cedar and pine. These shelters stayed open on all sides, allowing air to move freely while keeping insects and water at distance. Children played near the platforms during the day, while elders repaired bindings and checked for leaks before nightfall. Nothing in these camps was wasted. Every stick, reed, or hide could be reused or carried when the people moved. Such designs showed patience and understanding. They were not built for show or permanence, but for purpose. In each camp, structure followed need, and need followed season. The result was a way of living that answered the land rather than resisted it. Farther west, in dry country where winds swept across open plateaus, shelters became lighter still. The people there relied on sun, smoke, and distance to protect themselves. They built lean-tos, simple frames of poles covered with hides or brush, always facing away from the prevailing wind. These structures could be raised in an hour and left behind without trace. At dusk, fires were placed a few paces outside the open side, their smoke drifting through the shelter to drive away flies and gnats. When storms threatened, extra hides were fastened over the frame, anchored with stones or bones to keep them from lifting in the wind. The land itself became part of the design. Shallow depressions, rock overhangs, or the shadow of tall sagebrush added protection. Nights here were cooler, but insects still came in waves at dusk, following the scent of warmth. The people learned to read them, to know when to move higher or when to wait. Each shelter, however temporary, carried the memory of the last, a pattern repeated through generations, proving that true security was not in building stronger walls, but in learning where and how to rest lightly upon the earth. In dense forests, where air hung heavy and insects thrived after rain, people relied on smoke screens rather than thick walls. Fires were arranged in pairs, placed close enough for their smoke to meet in the middle. Between them, sleepers laid hides and mats resting inside the drifting haze. The smoke formed an invisible barrier that kept mosquitoes away without suffocating those beneath it. Above, woven mats of bark or long grasses filtered falling leaves and light rain, creating a calm twilight even in midday. Elders tended these fires through the night, shifting logs to maintain balance between heat and smoke. The practice was precise, learned through years of observation. Too much fire would scorch the bedding, too little and insects returned. In such places the rhythm of tending smoke became part of sleep itself, a pattern of waking briefly, feeding embers, and returning to rest. These smoke shelters were neither permanent nor decorative. They were solutions born directly from the landscape, each one shaped by air, temperature, and time. Within their soft cover, life continued quietly, proving that survival was not the absence of discomfort, but the ability to live within it gracefully. By late summer, when insects were thickest and nights remained warm, many families returned to fully open shelters, simple screens or shaded platforms built for airflow. The goal was not to hide from nature, but to move with it. Branch frames were draped with thin hides or grass mats that swayed with every breeze, keeping insects from settling. Fires smouldered low nearby, releasing slow trails of smoke that curled upward through the still air. Beneath these light coverings, sleep came easier than inside closed shelters. The stars remained visible through gaps, and the smell of earth and smoke filled every breath. When dawn arrived, dew glistened on the woven reeds, catching the first light like beads of water on skin. The people rose quietly, folding the mats, shaking the hides, and leaving only the faint circle of flattened grass to mark their rest. Each day's shelter became part of the day itself, used, adapted, and forgotten without waste. It was a way of living that left no scars upon the land. The earth offered space, and the people answered with care, building nothing they could not carry, trusting the balance that had always carried them in return. Across the vast lands of North America, sleeping practices shifted with geography as naturally as plants followed the seasons. Every region shaped rest in its own way, reflecting the air, the ground, and the life it sustained. On the Great Plains, where grass stretched to the horizon and wind never ceased, people built teepees, cone-shaped shelters designed to breathe. In summer, their hides were lifted to let air pass through. In winter, they were sealed tight and anchored with stones. The fire burned at the centre, drawing smoke upward through an opening that also revealed the stars. Families slept around this circle, with heads pointed outward, feet toward the heat. Farther east, where forests grew dense, bark lodges or longhouses replaced hides with wood and mats woven from reeds. There, nights carried the scent of cedar and soil, and the hum of insects was constant even beneath the roof. The variety of these shelters showed not separation but adaptation, a harmony between need and place. Each tribe shaped rest to its land, never imposing one form upon another, proving that sleep, like life itself, was always a conversation with the earth. Along the northern rivers and lakes, where summers were brief but swarms thick, the people of the subarctic built tents from animal hides stretched over wooden frames. Openings were covered with fine mesh made from split roots or grasses, thin enough for air to pass yet strong enough to stop mosquitoes. Inside, smoke from small fires curled upward and escaped through roof vents, leaving a soft haze that deterred biting flies. Sleeping skins lined the floor, thick with fur against the lingering chill that came even in midsummer. In these regions, insects were relentless but expected. People prepared salves from spruce resin mixed with fat, rubbing it along the edges of clothing and across wrists and necks. Every action carried precision born of long memory. Nights were quiet except for the constant hum outside the walls, a sound that faded only when frost returned. Within those tents, families slept deeply, warmed by both fire and the knowledge that their shelters had been tested for generations. Even the smallest comforts, a patch of fur, the steady glow of embers, were reminders that rest had been earned through skill, patience, and a perfect reading of the land's demands. To the south and west, where rain was rare and air stayed warm long after sunset, sleep often happened under open roofs or high terraces. Among the desert dwellers and Pueblo peoples, stone homes rose from the ground itself, their walls holding the day's heat long into night. In these places, families climbed to rooftops at dusk, spreading blankets woven from cotton and yucca fiber. The open sky served as ceiling, stars tracing slow paths above resting bodies. Breezes moved freely through the structures, and insects were few, driven off by dryness and smoke from small cooking fires below. In the morning, the roofs glowed faintly gold before the sun cleared the horizon, and sleepers stirred with its light. This rhythm belonged entirely to the desert, no fire needed, no heavy hides to hold warmth, only air and stone. Sleep here was direct and simple, as natural as breathing. The people trusted the sky itself for shelter, knowing that storms were distant and the earth beneath was steady. It was a kind of peace that came not from protection, but from acceptance, from living so closely with the land that rest required nothing more than stillness. Along the western coasts, where air stayed heavy with salt and fog rolled inland from the sea, sleep carried the rhythm of tides. Coastal tribes built mat lodges from reeds and cedar bark, flexible enough to withstand wind and moisture. Fires burned in shallow pits near the entrances, and smoke slipped easily through open seams in the roof. Inside, families rested on raised platforms lined with woven mats, the sound of surf echoing softly through the structure. The smell of seaweed mixed with smoke, marking each night with the scent of the ocean itself. In these places, insects were fewer, but the chill was constant. Warmth came from bodies, and from careful layering of hides or woven blankets. Some camps moved with the seasons, following fish runs and shell harvests. Others remained fixed beside the same coves year after year. The people understood their coast as both shelter and provider. When storms gathered, they listened to the change in waves, tightening walls and banking fires. To sleep here was to share rhythm with the sea, to rest between tides, hearing the slow, eternal breath of water that shaped both land and life along its edge. Each landscape, from the cold forests of the north to the deserts of the south, shaped its own meaning of rest. There was no single way to sleep, only countless ways to live with the land. The people did not carry blueprints or fixed designs. They carried knowledge written in practice. Every tribe, every region, adjusted sleep to match the sky, wind and soil beneath them. On the plains, smoke rose from teepees against open stars. In forests, light flickered against bark walls. In the desert, moonlight spread unbroken across the roofs of clay homes. These differences were never separation. They were harmony expressed through form. Across generations, children grew up watching their elders prepare sleeping spaces, learning not just how to survive, but how to rest without waste. When strangers later built houses of timber and stone, these open-air ways seemed fragile. Yet they endured, carried in memory in seasonal camps, in the balance between wind and warmth that every sleeper still feels outdoors. The land had always been the first house. In every region, under every sky, the lesson remained the same. Safety was found not in walls but in understanding where to lie. When the camp finally quieted, what remained was the simple rhythm of breathing. Families slept close together, forming a single circle of warmth. The pattern was the same from plains to forest to desert. Elders near the fire, parents beside them, and children between. The youngest were wrapped in soft hides or woven blankets, their small faces turned toward the glow. This closeness was more than comfort. It was safety. The body's warmth replaced the walls they did not build. In every region, people understood that the night was shared, not endured alone. Those who woke before dawn often listened for the steady breathing of others, measuring peace by sound. If the fire burned too low, someone rose quietly to feed it, careful not to wake the sleeping group. Even dreams seemed to move through the camp together, shaped by the same air, the same slow heartbeat of the earth. To rest was not only to recover, it was to belong. Night after night, through generations, that bond of shared stillness carried them safely through the darkness, reminding each person that survival began not in isolation, but in the warmth of many lives resting as one. The world of sleep was also a world of sound and touch. Without walls, the senses stayed awake even when the body rested. A small movement nearby, the turning of a shoulder, the rustle of grass, the soft cry of an infant, could travel through the circle like wind across water. Each person responded without thought. A hand might reach out to steady a child, a voice might murmur to quiet the restless. In this way, care continued through the night. The awareness that never fully slept became a kind of protection. People trusted one another's presence as they trusted the fire's glow. To sleep outside meant knowing that safety was shared, woven through many actions that no one needed to command. When storms came or animals passed close, the smallest change in breath or silence was enough to rouse the group. The night did not divide them. It bound them more tightly. Over time, this rhythm of response became instinct, carried across generations. Even in the darkest hours, the sound of nearby life, the whisper of movement, the sigh of sleep, was enough to remind them that they were never alone beneath the open sky. For children, sleep was their first lesson in belonging. Long before they learned to hunt or gather, they learned the quiet customs of rest, where to lie, when to stay still, how to listen. Wrapped tightly in hides, they felt the steady heat of their parents beside them and the softness of animal fur beneath. The world beyond the firelight was unknown, but the nearness of others made it safe. At dawn, when eyes opened, children watched the routine unfold, the stirring of embers, the shaking of blankets, the smell of morning smoke. These moments taught them that safety came from preparation, not fear. Even play followed this rhythm. Children napped in the shade of shelters or beneath woven mats, mimicking the adults who worked nearby. Through repetition, rest became tradition, and tradition became culture. By the time they grew old enough to travel or build their own fires, they carried with them an understanding older than words, that the night was not something to escape, but something to meet with readiness, calm, and trust in the people lying close beside them. Elders carried the deepest connection to the night. Many had spent their lives sleeping under every kind of sky, through storms, migrations, and changing seasons. Their bodies knew the ground's shape as well as memory itself. In the quiet hours, when younger ones slept heavily, elders often stayed half awake, their hearing tuned to wind and fire. They rose to adjust logs, whisper to children in dreams, or watch the movement of stars through gaps in shelter walls. Their presence gave calm to the camp. Their stillness reminded others that night required patience, not fear. Around them rested the weight of generations, knowledge passed not through speech, but through steady example. Insects hummed beyond the smoke, yet the elders remained unbothered, understanding their rhythm as part of the Earth's order. To them, sleep was not simply recovery. It was participation in the natural cycle that continued whether eyes were open or closed. When morning came, they were the first to rise, raking ashes and stirring embers, greeting the new day with the same quiet acceptance that had carried them through the dark. When morning finally brightened the edges of camp, the world seemed both renewed and unchanged. The people rose slowly, stretching limbs still warm from shared rest. The fire smouldered low, insects began their hum again, and birds answered the first light. Around them lay the faint traces of the night, the flattened grass, the marks of footprints, the last curls of smoke dissolving into air. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then the rhythm of day returned. Fires rekindled, tools gathered, food prepared. The peace of night was never wasted. It fed the strength of morning. Families carried with them the quiet calm that sleep had given, knowing it would sustain them through long work and travel. Children laughed. Elders spoke softly, and the same earth that had held them through darkness now supported their steps toward light. In this cycle, no moment stood apart. Rest, waking, labour and silence all belonged to one pattern, the same pattern that had guided their ancestors before them. The night's closeness, its sounds and warmth, faded gently into day, leaving behind a lesson that each generation carried forward. To live well was to rest well within the world. Dawn arrived not as a sudden change, but as a slow turning of colour. The sky lightened at the edges, while smoke from the night's fire thinned into the pale air. Families stirred quietly, their movements soft and familiar. The world that had seemed endless in darkness now revealed itself again. Trees, water, and ground returning to view as if waking beside them. The fire crackled weakly, its coals still alive beneath a thin layer of ash. Someone leaned forward to stir them, adding dry twigs until orange light spread across faces. This was the hour of renewal, when silence held a calm different from night. Insects resumed their hum, and birds began their morning calls. The rhythm of breathing changed. Rest shifted into motion. Each person rose in their own time, stretching sore muscles, brushing dew from hides, and shaking off the night's coolness. No one hurried. Morning always began this way, unfolding gently, like the mist lifting from rivers. The day's work waited beyond the horizon, but for a few brief moments the world belonged only to those who had shared the night and were ready to meet the light once more. After waking, the first duty was to tend the fire. Embers from the night before were gathered into the centre of the pit, and dry grass was added until smoke turned bright and steady again. This small ritual linked the night's safety to the coming day's survival. Fire was never simply warmth, it was continuity, a living bridge from darkness to light. Around it, people spoke little. The sound of fire and the faint crackle of dew-dried wood said enough. Nearby, water was fetched from streams or lakes, carried in skin bags or woven baskets darkened from use. The morning smell of smoke and damp earth filled the air. Children chased one another quietly while adults folded bedding and stacked hides to dry. Every action fit a rhythm so well practiced it required no words. The camp changed shape with each sunrise. What had been a shelter for rest became within minutes a place of movement and purpose. Yet even in motion, calm remained. The fire, carried from night to day, was proof that the balance between rest and labour had not been broken, only passed gently from one form of living to the next. Morning also meant attention to the body. People washed their hands and faces in cold water, letting the chill sharpen their senses. Some stood silently at the river's edge, breathing deeply, watching the light spread across the surface. In these early hours, tasks began slowly. Tools were checked, nets untangled, baskets mended. The world felt new but predictable, following the same pattern that had guided ancestors for centuries. Sleep still lingered in their movements, but its calm steadied the day's first efforts. In many camps, soft words of thanks were spoken, to the fire that survived the night, to the ground that held them, to the air that returned warmth to their lungs. These gestures were not ceremony but habit, a quiet exchange between people and the living world. insects returned to their work among the grasses, and birds dipped low over water searching for food. Life began again in full motion, as if the night's stillness had never existed. Yet it had, and every person who rose from the ground carried its piece forward, a reminder that each dawn was both an ending and a beginning written into the earth itself. The quiet work of morning carried the memory of night. Bedding was folded carefully, never left scattered, for disorder invited dampness or insects to return. Ashes were spread thinly over the ground to hide scent and prevent stray sparks from catching. Each family moved through these tasks with practiced precision, their steps light but deliberate. The fire that had been watched through darkness now stood as the day's first companion again. Food was prepared from what remained: dried meat, roasted roots, or gathered seeds, and shared evenly before travel or work began. In the pale light, smoke rose in thin spirals, drifting across low hills and treetops like signals of life continuing. The same gestures had been repeated for centuries, unchanging yet alive. Children learned by doing, copying the motions of their elders until the rhythm became natural. By mid-morning, camps were often silent again, emptied as people followed trails to hunt, fish, or gather. Yet the ground itself held the shape of rest. Flattened grass, a faint ring of stones, the story of a night well spent. Even when unseen, these traces told of balance, a people who lived with the earth, never apart from it. As the sun climbed, the last coolness of night vanished from the air. The land grew bright and full of sound, birds calling, insects rising, wind shifting through grass. The peace of sleep turned outward into energy and movement. Fires burned higher now, used for cooking or signalling rather than warmth. The people's steps lengthened, their voices carried farther. Still, the memory of the night lingered quietly beneath everything they did. It reminded them that every day was born from darkness, and that rest made labour possible. To live close to the ground meant living within this unbroken circle. No part of it could be hurried or skipped. As the morning became full day, families left their camps clean and open, trusting the land to receive them again when evening returned. The sky above, once filled with stars, now blazed white with light. The same world that had sheltered their dreams now called them to motion. In that balance between stillness and effort, between night's calm and day's work, life remained steady. Renewal was not a single event. It was the quiet, continuous act of waking with the earth, again and again. For those who lived beneath the open sky, the night was never an enemy. It was a teacher, steady, unchanging, and patient. Through it, people learned the meaning of balance, between cold and warmth, silence and sound, motion and stillness. Every night spent outdoors shaped understanding of the world and of themselves. They learned how air moved before rain, how insects fell silent before cold, and how fire's smoke carried safety into sleep. These lessons were not written or spoken. They were lived. Knowledge passed through repetition, each action confirming what the land had already shown. Over time, these patterns formed an unwritten science of rest, how to choose ground, when to light fires, and where to lie so that life continued without struggle. In that relationship, comfort was earned through respect, not control. Even now, the same stars that once looked down on their sleeping circles remain above us, unchanged. They remind us of the same truth, that to live closely with the earth is to listen to it, and that peace, like warmth, begins when we stop resisting the world that holds us. Across generations, this understanding became part of identity. It shaped not only how people slept, but how they thought, moved, and built their days. The open night taught rhythm, how to rise with the sun, how to rest when work ended, and how to let the world's own pace set their own. Sleep was not a pause, it was a continuation of life in another form. Those who lived this way felt no separation between themselves and the land. Each gust of wind, each insect hum, and each flicker of flame carried meaning. From these small lessons came larger ones: patience, awareness, and care. Children learned early that survival depended on attention, not strength. Listening to crickets could tell the temperature, watching smoke could predict the weather. This deep familiarity created not fear of nature but confidence within it. The people did not conquer their environment, they belonged to it. Their shelters, fires, and nightly routines all echoed that belonging. Even in today's world, where walls and noise have replaced open fields, the same wisdom remains beneath memory. the knowledge that peace is not found by leaving nature, but by remembering how to live gently inside it. The lessons of the open sky also shaped community. Night after night, the act of sleeping together reinforced trust. In every camp, safety was collective. The same warmth that kept one person alive kept all alive. No one was beyond the circle of firelight. This habit of closeness extended into daylight work, sharing food, defending territory, and building shelters side by side. Rest had taught them unity before labour demanded it. The calm of night carried forward into the discipline of day. They understood that to live together meant to breathe together, each life linked to the others in visible ways. Their societies were not born from law or force, but from countless nights of quiet cooperation. The practice of tending fires, of listening for danger, of sleeping near one another built a form of order deeper than rules. It was trust woven through generations, carried in the memory of every shared night. Even in silence, that connection remained unbroken. The land itself seemed to echo it, the sound of water flowing, wind shifting through grass, the endless rhythm of a world that had learned to live, rest, and awaken as one. Over time, the habits of outdoor life became memory, carried through story and tradition. Even after permanent homes replaced open shelters, the knowledge remained in small gestures. The way a fire is built, the care taken in choosing where to rest, the instinct to listen for weather in the sound of wind. These were echoes of an older rhythm, proof that the connection between body and land had never been fully broken. Some still sought that quiet balance in the wilderness, sleeping under stars, following the same cycles of warmth and air that guided their ancestors. The lessons of those who came before were not lost. They had simply changed form. What began as survival had become understanding. The people had once learned from necessity. Later generations remembered by choice. Through them, the land continued to teach that rest and respect are not separate, that knowledge can exist in silence, and that comfort does not require control. The open sky remained their oldest teacher, patient and unchanging, reminding those who looked upward that life endures longest when it follows, rather than fights, the simple patterns of the earth. Tonight, the same sky still waits above us, unchanged since the first fires were lit on the plains. The stars move as they always have. The wind carries the same voices through the grass, and the insects hum their steady song. What has altered is only our distance from them. Yet the memory of that closeness remains. To imagine those early nights is to remember what it meant to be part of the living world. To rest without walls, to trust the warmth of others, to wake with the light of dawn. The people who slept beneath that sky did not think of history. They thought of survival, comfort, and care. Their stories live now in the land itself, in rivers, forests, and open fields that once held their camps. As we listen to these memories, we return, if only for a moment, to that calm rhythm of breath and earth. It reminds us that peace was never hidden or lost. It has always been waiting in the open air, beneath the same endless stars that once guarded their sleep and still guard ours tonight. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your time here. If you'd like to hear more quiet history like this, consider subscribing. Your support truly means a lot.